Well, hello there. We are back for another book review after a considerably long break. I blame CBSE. Now, this is one gifted by my teacher, Alaska ma'am. Thank you once again, ma'am. It took a bit of time to make this review. This is The Adventures of Feluda, the first volume. Now, Feluda is perhaps the most famous character in detective stories in Indian literature. The author of these short stories was the famous filmmaker and writer Satyajit Ray. The interesting part about these short stories is that Satyajit Ray was initially influenced by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. But he realized that Sherlock Holmes had some elements which might make it inappropriate for the younger audience. He principally wanted to write these books for his young children. Therefore, taking a few inspirations and adding a lot of Bengali and Indian culture as a whole into these short stories, he made them into a concoction and a combination which made them accessible and readable for most people across the world and in the country. Now, these were initially published in a magazine called Sandesh, which was started by Satyajit Ray's grandfather, which he revived again. They were not released as a collection of stories or even published as booklets. They were released in that magazine as weekly editions. It started with Danger in Darjeeling, which had a different name in Bengali. After many readers sent back letters showcasing their acknowledgement of how good these short stories were, Satyajit Ray continued on for over 4 dozen stories until 1992 and his inevitable passing, which resulted in a few unfinished stories, but most of them which he completed turned out to be very good. Now, the interesting part about these stories when compared to the inspiration, that is Sherlock Holmes, is that while Sherlock Holmes was mostly based around London or the greater part of London, these stories occur across India, many parts of Bengal including Darjeeling, the Bhutan border, Lucknow, Delhi, and even some foreign elements, which make these stories, as I felt reading, somewhat of a journey for the reader as well, as we feel that we're also traveling across the places where these characters are traveling. Now let us get to another very important part, the characters themselves. We have 3 main ones. Feluda, of course, the titular character, who has very clearly been very inspired by Sherlock Holmes, a young, eccentric, smart a young man who occasionally smokes and has a sidekick named Topshe, who was also loosely based on Dr. John Watson, who was in Sherlock Holmes. Then we have a third character who might be compared to Lestrade in Sherlock Holmes, to anybody who has read it. And he accompanies these 3 after the first few stories in many parts of their adventures. Now, another thing about these short stories, when you're looking at this book, you might think that it is very broad, therefore there might be pages and pages of character exposition where characters are explaining elements of their surroundings. But I've generally found that to not be the case. These short stories are very action-packed, flow very smoothly, and are very attention-grabbing. Once you start on a story, it almost feels like you cannot stop until you've at least completed that short story, at least, if not the entire book. Therefore, I would recommend this to all readers who dabble in fiction, who have liked detective stories from the likes of Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle, to try this, because this is an excellent example of how we can use inspiration from our predecessors, in terms of literature at least, imbibe them with the principles and qualities that we consider important, and then release them, creating perhaps an even greater general audience than what we were inspired from. This I can recommend to practically anybody above the age of 8 or 9. With Sherlock Holmes, I would wait perhaps after 13. Therefore, this is a very great book series. And to anybody who would like to start a new set of short stories, this would be one of my top recommendations. That's it from me, Ansh Mishra. Thank you very much, Alaska ma'am, for giving me this book again. Follow for more.